Hola cartageneras y cartageneros, estamos en otro foro internacional para discutir con otras ciudades sobre los procesos de modernización administrativa de la ciudad. En esta ocasión tenemos dos invitados de lujo de la ciudad de Nueva York. Ellos vienen de la Oficina de Innovación y Relaciones Internacionales de la ciudad y vamos a tener una conversación acerca de cómo se innova, digamos, cómo se fomenta la innovación desde el sector público. Estarán con nosotros hoy Oscar Romero, el director de Innovación, Inclusiva y Relaciones Internacionales de la ciudad de Nueva York, quien lidera los esfuerzos de las comunidades para participar en la formulación de políticas públicas de gobierno abierto, inteligencia, desarrollo y equidad digital. Él es internacionalista de la Universidad New School de Nueva York. Y estará con nosotros también Ayesha Issadeen, quien es arquitecta, diseñadora de innovación, y ella se especializa en el tema de metodologías participativas en la ciudad de Nueva York. Con ellos conversará Juan Franco, economista de la Universidad Nacional, con maestría en planeación urbana de la Universidad de Chungang en Sur Corea, y quien es hoy nuestro secretario de Planeación Distrital. Entonces, bienvenidos. El evento está en inglés para poder habilitar que Ayesha pudiera participar en la conversación. Entonces, por favor, activen los subtítulos para que puedan escuchar la interesantísima conversación.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Juan. I'm the head of the planning office in Cartagena. I studied economics here in my country, and then a master in urban planning. I think this is probably the most challenging experience, professional experience in my life, because, well, this position, this public position is very, very difficult. There's a lot of challenges, and well, we're trying to do a good job. Nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you too.
Oscar.
Well, my name is Oscar Romero. I am the Director of Inclusive Innovation and International Cooperation at the Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer. In terms of my background, I did international studies in the University of Guadalajara in Mexico. Then I went for a master's in international affairs at the New School. And I have been working in this intersection of technologies for development in the public sector, academic institutions, and some international development organizations. So I'm really happy to be here. Hopefully there's a bunch of lessons that we can learn from each other.
Good, Ayesha, go ahead, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Ayesha Issadeen. My background is in architecture, and then I also studied international affairs with Oscar at the New School here in New York. I am the Innovation Design Coordinator at the Mayor's Office of the CTO here in New York, and I'm excited to see what we can learn from each other.
Okay, so let's begin. So the first part of this is we're going to give you around 10 minutes. So I guess Oscar will start, and then Ayesha can add her part. What we want to know is what you do. What is innovation for the city of New York? And how does it work? I mean, how does a city, which sounds like something very solid and very structured, like the public sphere is very solid and very structured, how does a city manage its innovation? We're very, very curious and want to know about that. Then we're going to give Juan David the possibility to ask a question of something that calls his attention from your response. And you're going to have another couple of minutes to answer that. And then we're going to start the conversation among all of us. Okay? So please go ahead. I think it's Oscar who would start, right?
Okay, yeah, for sure. So let me start with the last question about how the city manages innovation for here in New York City. So the innovation agenda does not sit in one agency. So you have a number of different agencies that take different parts of the cake, and each one of these agencies they sit in a different position in relationship to the city structure and the budgets they have, and also the power and influence they have, which has its pros and its cons. So just to run you through the different elements. We have the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which is an agency. Usually the distinction is when a mayor comes into office, they create their own executive offices, the mayoral offices, which could be a number of different topics that the mayor cares about. But there are agencies that will never change. Agencies that are like, for instance, the Department of Transportation, Department of Sanitation. And among those, we have the Economic Development Corporation. So those folks work on creating industries, on creating actual connections between all the different ecosystems that need to be in place for an industry to thrive. So how do we position New York City's cybersecurity industry across the world? How do we make connections with other countries? How do we bring foreign investment? How do we run incubator spaces that can create and generate the types of companies that then can add input and add value to the city in a particular industry? And they have a number of different industries that they're trying to develop in the city that they believe they have high value and can position talent. Then you have the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics. Those are the folks who work on all the open data related topics, from getting governments to share information, from getting them to be better at data collection, data analysis, data visualization. They are the ones working on creating a government structure that can actually hire talent that knows these different skills and that represents people that now, that is competitive against the private sector. Then you have folks like the algorithm officer, whose job is to actually take a look at how the artificial intelligence, whatever it might be, wherever it might be applied, from super complicated software to all the way to very simple databases and Excel sheets. His job is to analyze that and find whether there is anything that is contributing to inequality and then addressing it and changing it, but pretty much auditing the city's systems. Then you have the small business services people. They work on through one program called the Tech Talent Pipeline on creating actual opportunities for youth to learn the skills they need to learn so they can actually get a job in the tech industry. So the whole idea of diversifying how women, people of color, people of low income backgrounds can actually get into the tech industry, that's what they do. Then you have another piece of that agency that works on providing entrepreneurship support to small business owners, to women entrepreneurs, to Black entrepreneurs. And then finally, after all these different agencies I described, you have our agency, the Mayor's Office of the CTO. And just to not capitalize the conversation, let me pass it on to Ayesha so that she explains what our agency does, and then we can just go into more detail of the different questions you were asking.
So within the Mayor's Office of the CTO here in New York, we have 4 different pillars of work. We have universal broadband, we have digital services, inclusive innovation, and emerging tech and society. And then across those 4 pillars, we also have a design lab that spans across all 4, the Internet of Things, and an AI lab. So we focus on these 4 areas throughout the city. Universal broadband is probably the longest standing program within our office. And a lot of our capacity is spent doing that. And then within the inclusive innovation projects, we have NYCX collabs and NYCX moonshots. One is tackling neighborhood level innovation, and the other is tackling citywide innovation. Digital services is looking at creating different digital services to replace older bureaucracy systems and processes within government. So that's a really interesting element that I think we can discuss a little bit later as well. And then emerging tech and society, that's kind of up and coming things that we want to implement in the city, including IoT and AI strategies and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm.
That sounds very, very interesting, and it's very interesting how you cross some infrastructure innovation, but also some technology innovation. I like the fact that you have both components there. Juan David, would you like to know more about something that they have mentioned?
Well, I thought you guys had one institution, one innovation institution, but what I understood is that you have this big infrastructure. For example, you mentioned something like algorithm institution or something like that. Very interesting. And that's very important for our case because we are used to design center institutions. Everything is centered in just one institution, and probably that's something that we have to think about in terms of this topic. So that's very interesting. I have a very little question is, what are the triggers of innovation? What is that thing that for that process public?
I'm so sorry. On my end, it got. I couldn't hear you. Repeat the question.
Yes, it was cut. So you please repeat the question so that it's good for the recording.
Hello.
We are here. We can hear you a little bit better.
Yes.
Okay. What about now?
Yes, definitely better.
Hold on. I'm going to change. Hold on. Give me just 1 second, please.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. What about now?
That's better.
Okay. My question was, what do you think is the trigger of innovation in the public administration? What is that thing that we need to take into account to foster this process?
So I think, let's see, just to rescue some elements about this idea of centralization versus decentralization in the management of innovation. I think it has its pros and its cons. If you're going to have an agency that centralizes innovation, good news is somebody is accountable to make everything make sense, to connect all the different dots together in a broader strategy. Now, what could happen when you do that is that if that person or that group or that position is not empowered within the administration to actually make change, if they don't have the right amount of budget, if they don't have the right levers to actually get approved to do things, then your entire innovation agenda is going to go as far as the political power of this group of people that you position in that particular place. Now, if they are empowered, then great, everything is going to happen and be successful. What happens when you distribute power the way the New York City government has done it, which I don't think was done by design. I think it was more of a result of how the different conversations were happening, different laws were passed, different issues were important to people, and then agencies started to create them. What happens is you have more opportunities for different agendas to be successful, regardless of the failure or success of a single agency. So if one agency, for instance, does not have the political will and power to actually get something done, the other agencies might. And that also means that different budgets within the city that are associated with different goals, for instance, budgets that might be associated with accountability and equity for inclusion, might not be necessarily the same budgets that you had for economic development. But by having these pieces of agenda in both places, then you can get access to more sources to get more things done. So I would say those are kind of the things to think about when you want to distribute the agendas. And also, of course, something that is always useful, it represents more points of view. It's not the same what agenda somebody's going to design if they're thinking about urban planning and equity in the public space versus the agenda that somebody's going to design when they're thinking about creating industries and positioning people in jobs. Now, in terms of what makes innovation, so for us, we define innovation as both an ecosystem and a process. So it's a process that has a beginning and an end. The first step of this innovation process is the creation of a new idea. There's this ideation thing. Somebody thinks about a different way to do something. Now, the second piece is adaptation. So you put resources to make that idea actually happen and be somewhere. But then the last phase is retention. Once you're no longer putting money and time and effort behind an idea, Are people actually using the idea on their own? Is this idea finding a thriving space to actually solve the problem? If the answer is no, if as soon as you stop putting money, then that was the end of your process. Now, if the idea is adopted, then that idea becomes the status quo, and then the innovation process starts all over again. So that's the process. Now, all of this happens in a context. It does not happen in a vacuum. Happens in a context of an ecosystem of institutions that just are gatekeepers. They decide whether you can and can't do something. It happens within rules, which are the laws and the regulations that prevent us from, say, putting sensors on the streets and collecting everybody's data. And it happens within cultural practices. When you get to talk to one public servant that has been working on that thing for years, they do a good job, and you tell them they should do it in a different way because now the way in which they do it puts the data at risk or collects data in a particular way, and they say no because I'm about to retire in, say, one year or 2 years. If they say no because they do not have the data literacy. So cultural practices, capacity that they have, all of these different things, rules, institutions, biases, they're going to determine whether your idea ever moves from the innovation phase, from the ideation space, into adaptation or retention. Now, that is kind of like the landscape that we have. And we decide to do innovation because we have values and we have a purpose behind innovation. For us, the goal of everything that we do is about addressing inequality. So that is a fundamental thing. So we don't innovate because we want to be more efficient. We don't innovate because there's new flash technology that can do something. We innovate because there's a problem. We have reason to believe that technology can actually help addressing, and that problem is going to ultimately address needs of New Yorkers and reduce inequality in the city of New York. There's a number of values that we try to foster. You know, this idea that every time that you put technology out there, that is going to have consequences, that nothing is neutral, and then you have to think about how everything you deploy in the public space is building up these layers and layers of inequality, of systemic inequality. Then we believe that technology should be accessible and affordable. Anybody should be able to use it. If you put in technology, digital services, and you're expecting people to go online, but you have a massive digital divide, then that's not equitable. That's not the kind of technology we will be trying to deploy. And then finally, we think people should have the ability to say no. They should have the ability to change their mind. Technology should be empowering to community members. And so that's where we have a number of programs in which we try to co-design. We create this idea of consent where people can actually change their mind about the type of technology they see in the public space. So those are some ideas. I'm going to stop talking now.
Wow, there's a lot to learn from what you just said. I mean, I love a couple of things, specifically the fact that innovation is a process, and at the same time, it's an ecosystem, that it requires both phases. I really think that's a very powerful idea. And then the other thing is that you have to give tech a purpose, in the sense that it cannot be just, we're going to innovate. It has to be innovate to solve some issue. Like, you have to give it a purpose and a direction. I really, really think that's a very powerful and very empowering idea. Ayesha, would you like to add anything to how he just responded to Juan David?
Oscar really succinctly and wonderfully covered a lot of topics there.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Yeah, I was saying that Oscar did a great overview of innovation within the New York ecosystem, so I think I'll leave it at that. But I see Juan David has his hand up.
Yes. So Juan, please continue.
Yeah, I would like to know if it was difficult to implementing in the city this innovation process, because I think that's probably one of the big challenges for us is to change the mindset of public servants, but not only public servants, but citizens, about the importance of innovation.
Well, yes, it is challenging. That is the bottom line. But I would say different audiences have different concerns, and being able to design programming that addresses the concerns of different audiences, I think that is a step number one. So one of the things we do in our office, we have these two programs, the Collabs program and the Moonshot program. Now, some people make this dichotomy, what I believe to be a false dichotomy, between top-down public policy and bottom-up public policy. And they say, well, we should get more bottom-up public policy, which I totally agree with, but I don't think it is a false dichotomy in the terms of you should get one or the other. I believe you need both for different problems. So to give you examples, if you're trying to understand what are the challenges of managing the traffic flows of 8.5 million people in an urban setting the size of Manhattan, there are so many institutions in the world that can actually speak to that kind of massive of a problem, right? So you're probably going to have to talk to the different major global cities and the Department of Transportations or the urban planning departments, and those are going to be the folks that can understand that problem. So for those problems, you need to think about the management in a broad sense, and you need to basically engage public servants. Now, if you're thinking about what it's like to be discriminated on the streets because of the way you look, then you don't talk to the politicians and the public servants, you talk to people. If you want to know what it's like to have to take a bus for 4 hours to go to school because the services that you want are not where you live, you have to talk to people. So what we did was design this program to actually address public servants and understand, okay, what are your structural challenges that you face and how can we help you address your goals? Because that is the beginning of everything. Like here and everywhere with any stakeholder, ultimately we are their servants. And so to give you an example of a management problem that we actually launched. So one of the challenges we had was how do we deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the city in a way that it's equitable? If we just let the invisible hand do the job, then we're going to have a bunch of charging stations in wealthy places. And then even if electric vehicles become at some point affordable, then those are going to go to the places where you have the infrastructure, which are going to be the wealthy people. So we designed this challenge to understand what kind of city asset was distributed across the entire city of New York that then could be used to charge vehicles. And so this is clearly a management urban design problem. So for that, we use the Moonshot program. Now, we have neighborhoods across the city where people have very, very pressing problems, whether those are safety, whether those are displacement and the rent is increasing, access to health services. And so for those issues, we created that program called Collabs. And basically what we do is we go to the communities and talk to people about what the challenges they're facing, try to understand their needs. And then if people tell us, well, we're concerned about safety, then we make our job to learn what kind of safety, what street, what time, what kind of violence. And then once we have the answers to those questions, then we can ask ourselves, is there a role that information and communication technologies can play to address this problem? And when we say that, we're very specific. We're like, is there a data problem about automation? Is there a data problem about communication? Somebody that does not know the rights, communication from point A to point B. Is there a problem of processing? Something that is so complicated that we cannot continue to evaluate on an Excel sheet, that we should then get some more data and more complicated models to understand. And finally, is there a problem of simplification? Governments usually love their forms, and for good reason sometimes. But then for a citizen, it's hard to know whether you're eligible for the services, for the programs. And so maybe using digital services to make it easy to just answer a few questions and then they know what they can do, that can go a long way. So if we find that any of the problems has to do with these things, then we design a global innovation challenge. And that is where we try to, for the moonshots and the collabs, we use that as a way to tell the agencies and the people, well, here are the goals that you try to achieve. You can just try to get that done, or you can invite the world to try to find ways to address these problems. You get really positive advertisement for the ways in which you're actually trying to engage with innovation and engage with different industries. You create an umbrella for partnerships, and ultimately, you bring more resources than yours to address your agenda. And that narrative has worked for us so far.
Wow, I think that's all very interesting and very practical. I think that's the kind of content we really need for these webinars. because I think it's a very applicable response to how to manage innovation. Ayesha, I wanted to talk to you about being an architect, right? I think being an architect is gives you a lot of space for innovation, but public dynamics are kind of complex in that sense. So I would really like to understand what your role is, because I think it can deeply speak to the public space team on how they do stuff and how to work probably with communities. I'm going to share something with the audience, and it is that Ayesha has been a volunteer in Cartagena. She worked with a foundation some years ago. So she's an expert in participatory design. And it is very interesting to have all these hardened ideas uh, be performed in a participatory way. So I would really like you to tell us how you do those things.
So for me, it was actually these two programs, the NYCX Moonshots and Collabs, that really drew me to this office. I'm probably one of the people with the least tech background in our office, but I don't really see that as a disadvantage. I think it's an advantage because I'm bringing different perspectives. As Anna mentioned, I did the workshop with Architecture Without Borders and FEM in Cartagena in 2014. And within that space, we had so many different professionals coming together to solve this problem. And so you tend to have different perspectives from engineers, from lawyers, from architects, all coming together to solve a problem. And I think those different perspectives allow you to take an approach which is not siloed. So in the same way, I think I try to offer my perspectives within the CTO's office. I was brought on to work more on the community engagement stuff, but unfortunately, my timing within the office has meant that I have slightly missed a lot of the community engagements for the ongoing projects that we have in the office. I'm hoping to get more involved in the next iteration of collabs. One other thing that I also wanted to add from what Oscar was discussing before is that once our communities have identified and prioritized the issues that they're facing and subject topics have been chosen, we do engage with city agencies that we consider would be experts. So if we're working with safety, for example, we'll connect with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. If we're working with waste management, then we'll connect with the Department of Sanitation. And I think that bringing in those agencies as experts on board within our innovation challenge also inspires other agencies who maybe don't have a team or an individual that is considering innovation or considering different ways of addressing these problems. I think being exposed to the process and seeing how we're working with the community and making sure it's a very participatory process allows them to draw out what those advantages are and see what the process looks like. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I really do think that all these participatory approaches are indeed very, very necessary in creating ownership over every type of process in a city. And I also value very much what you said, that in tech teams, you need to have people that are not tech experts or that have a different perspective towards technology, because sometimes, and as Oscar mentioned before, tech has a lot of bias, and it's hard to notice when you are only among the people that know about this. So it's really interesting to have an added perspective there. So I'm going to give the word to Juan David, because and I wanted to ask all of us that, like, let's have a conversation about what are the challenges, like what are the biggest obstacles you see. Oscar has touched base on some of them, but what other obstacles you see? What are the specific problems you find, Juan David, in a city like Cartagena to bring forth this mindset? I think myself that if we think about the mindset, it's going to be a huge problem. But other problems that arise around innovation and these types of ways of governing the city.
Well, from my perspective and my experience in this city, I think the key challenge is to make people understand, not only people in the public sector, but also citizens, to make them understand that public sector and innovation as concepts are completely related. They can work each other, because I think that most of us believe that innovation is something that has to do only with machines or smartphones or physical things. But in the public sector, innovation has big participation. I think that's a big problem. I believe that good leadership is really key to change this mindset. I have found in this institution a lot of reluctancy from people that has worked here 10 years, 20 years, because they don't believe that innovation is something that we can use to change the way we do things. And it's been a difficult process, very slow process, but I think that's the challenge, how to change that mindset. And not, like I said, not only people in the public institutions, but also the citizens, because they don't believe in the public sector. If you say local government to citizens, they believe, they think in corruption, they think in a slow process, and they don't think that innovation is something important. So we need to, if we change the mindset of people, they are going to push the government in that sense, to use innovation as a very useful tool to change a lot of processes, a lot of things that we need to change.
Yes, I agree with you, and I would add, before I give the word to the people from New York, I mean, I would add that one of the biggest challenges is that the idea that innovation is kind of a discourse of people that have everything solved, and so innovation is what you do after you have solved the key issues. I have a sense that people tend to believe that, like it's like a luxury, something that you do after, like in New York can afford to speak about innovation because it has resources, and not and it is not a way to solve the pressing issues. No, in that sense, I valued very much the fact that you said that the purpose was building equity. I think that's a great question, and for a city like Cartagena, yes, it's a great question. I think Juan David wants to add something else, so please go ahead.
Yes, just one little thing. I think that people believe that innovation is something really technical, really far away from what we can do. And I think just little changes in some specific processes can be done through innovation. So that's the thing. We need to make the people understand that innovation is not something rare, something difficult. It's just something that comes from motivation. That's why I said good leadership is key to change this mindset and get the things done.
Yeah, so we would definitely would like to hear Ayesha and Oscar just react to what we just told you, because definitely it's different to speak from a city like Cartagena, which is smaller. It has huge challenges in terms of inequality, and I think our mindset is not so advanced. One of the really key things of that you get from New York is people are always thinking forward. Here our culture is a little bit afraid of moving on. I think we like to stay how it is, and we're very afraid, very much afraid of change and transitions. So I would really like to hear your reaction to what we just said.
Ayesha, why don't you take this one first?
It's very interesting. The last thing that you just said, Anna, is what sticks to my mind, because although New York is an ever-changing city, and so I feel like the context of New York is always changing, but I'm not sure how quickly the city and bureaucracy processes are changing at the same time. And so I do think we do face some of the same challenges in convincing people and getting buy-in and, you know, showing people the value of the strategies that we've chosen to take. So I think the hosting of innovation challenges has worked really well. What the process is to communicate and engage with the communities and figure out those problems. And then when we host the challenge in looking for solutions for these problems, we then pilot those solutions in New York City for 6 to 9 months. And I think that is something that is, I don't want to say it's small scale because it does require a lot of capacity from the city government itself. But in terms of a citywide issue, yes, it's somewhat smaller scale. And I think it's like a little win to show people how it's working. And through that process, through the pilot, you have the community that's buying in and coming on board and changing their attitude towards innovation because they have been involved in that process and they feel some ownership. And also, again, you have these other agencies who are watching how this pilot plays out. So I do think that there are still a lot of challenges in innovating, even in New York City. What I am noticing, though, is as people in the city change, as younger generations move in, people who have had access and more rely a little bit more on technology from a younger age come in, I think we are starting to challenge some of these processes and really push for that change. So going back to the beginning of the conversation of like centralized or decentralized and having one institution that tackles innovation, I think what New York is doing by having all these separate little entities moving the agenda forward slowly in different institutions seems to be working quite well and could work well for a city like Cartagena, where if there's little buy-in for the concept of innovation, then having an entire institution that is just innovating might find a lot of resistance from any agency that they approach asking them to make changes. So by having kind of like-minded individuals that can maybe band together in a less formal way than an institution of its own in innovation, and having kind of different people set in different institutions promoting that agenda, it might be easier to tackle individual mindsets and slowly change the culture from a kind of bottom-up approach as opposed to the top-down.
Great. Oscar?
Yes, no, lots of thoughts here. I guess the first thing I will say to somebody is the world changes with or without us, and that makes us pose some questions. For instance, and I would say also putting things into the context of the things that matter to the people who actually have to make decisions is always a dance that we all have to do. If I'm talking to somebody that is managing large procurement processes, say an agency that has to work on education and needs to hire a bunch of different educators and trainers across the entire city, right? We have these very, at least in New York City, outdated procurement processes. We put an RFP, we put it out. Those who find out, we only have like a few months for people to find out. We get a very small number of applicants. And yet we live in a world, in a moment where companies like Facebook, like Google, you know what, any private company that pays them can actually find very targeted information about hundreds of people that provide the services that we're looking for, right? So what is the consequence of not using tools that are at our disposal or not thinking about ways to do the things we do better? Well, the consequence in this case is cost. What it means is that the people that continue to get the public funding are the people that know about it. It means that they also, since they know there's not that many people competing, chances are it's not going to be cheap. So if we can put this in terms of money, in terms of cost, for those people who think about money and cost, then that is going to make sense. So what we're telling them is you have to modernize how you do procurement. And it's not about any new flashy thing. I mean, it is something we do when we don't have money. What do you do if you only have $100 and you got to get to the end of the week? You figure out ways to stretch it. It's not. So I would say this is finding the places where the conversation is not a luxury, and rather the conversation is, you know what, you need to do this because you're losing money if you don't do it otherwise. So I would say that's one thing. Then another thing has to do with impact, just impact. So for instance, if your agency's job is to serve youth and say we're trying to, I'm sure there's an agency whose job is this in Cartagena. You want to serve youth who's been victims of gender violence, right? I mean, if that is the population you're serving, chances are they have an Instagram, chances are they have a TikTok account, chances are they're in social media. Maybe think about being there, right? So does that mean that we're going to go around the government saying, hey, you all agencies, you all need to start making TikTok videos? Not maybe not all agencies, but definitely those whose main audience is in those spaces, right? If we're talking about youth and health, can we do that job without talking about video games and the time that people spend on their computers? Maybe not. But that was not something that we, as local government, were doing in the past. So innovating means, how can we continue to do our job in a world that does not look the same as it did before, right? Again, not a luxury. If you're really trying to serve young women, chances are you're going to serve more if you put yourself in those spaces. Not a luxury. Then another thing I will say is the whole risk-averse perception. Everybody is worried about the same. All agencies are worried about bad press. They don't want to do something that is going to look bad, that is going to get them to, that is going to get some newspaper article to come out and then them having to deal with the consequences. So what we say, and this may be just a consulting trick, but we go around and try to find the problem and say, well, you can quietly try to solve this problem, or you can create these positive frameworks to actually collaboratively solve this problem. And we can de-risk the possibility that you're going to get bad press. So what are your options, right? You can use our money, our resources, and our extra time to solve that problem that you're so worried about. So we change the perspective, right? Instead of simply saying, convincing somebody to do something they're scared of, you say, you don't have to do it alone. Use my entire agency. Use every single penny I have. By the way, it's not a lot, but use it. So you do that. And then the other thing I would say in terms of the middle management, right? Because all of this is leadership, right? If you're talking then to middle management, I would say make it interesting for them. One of the things we've seen success work well here is you create career training opportunities. So if you want people to be excited about innovation, then make it matter to them. Give them opportunities to actually go and learn something, increase their skills, increase their ability to get a better job eventually in the future. I think this idea that government is the job where you found security and you're always going to stay, for many people is true, and that's okay, but it can also be a platform that allows you to jump to whatever is next in your life. And I think like leveraging those opportunities of career development as a way to get people into caring for innovation and learning new skills is a really good way to get middle management interested in this. And then the last thing I will say is about the people, right? When people say, at least in New York City, you're slow and these things are not working. And I see corruption because my problems have not been solved. To be honest with you all, they're right. We're slow, there's corruption, and their problems have not been solved. Because the reality is, civic engagement is not something that somebody wakes up and says, oh, today I feel like I want to understand how people are managing the public transportation systems of my streets. They actually say, they wake up and they have a landlord that is abusive, that is not fixing something and wants to kick them out of their apartment. They get out and they can't take the bus because it's under construction and something went away. People complain, people do civic engagement when whatever is that they're complaining about is so fundamentally wrong that they cannot continue to do what they want to do with their lives. So the fundamental thing is people are upset. So to me, when you go against government, the first job is to say, to be that first phase for people anger and receive that and take it because they're right. They're right to say whatever they say. And then from that point of really acknowledging the truth that is on the street, then you can start to have a conversation with people about, okay, look, you're right. Before we were here, you didn't have the entry door that we need to your narrative for government. So now that you have us, how can we work together on getting this thing done? And at that point, the question is, make sure, I guess the challenge is make sure that whatever it is that you say you're going to do, you actually can do, so that you don't lose the trust of people. Now, those are my 2 cents on these challenges around convincing people and public servants to work on innovation.
Wow, I've definitely loved this conversation. I think it's on point in many of the things that that you've both mentioned. And I want to pick Juan David's brain. I want to ask him if we didn't have any obstacles, and if you know, like all the difficulties that we have in every sense, but if we didn't have all these obstacles and all these, what would you do to be able to implement something that had to do with public innovation in the planning office? Like, what, after you hear this pair, what would you like to see happening?
Well,
What could start?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we're working on it. Our relation with the citizens is through the different procedures that we have here in this office. One example, uh, we produce land use certificates. They are very popular in the city. And nowadays, we produce these certificates in the old-fashioned way. It's very difficult. It takes like 1 or 2 months to produce one certificate that you can just watch in our website. But the whole procedure to get the letter in my desk for my signature, it takes like 1 or 2 months. It's something, it's really difficult to understand this process, even for me. And we are working right now in something that will allow the office in the next year, first semester, that citizens, if they need to get this certificate, the only thing that they will have to do is to get into the web page, put the ID of the property they're interested in, and just push one button, and the system will produce the certificate with my signature on it. So that will change completely the way we are relating with the citizens. It's going to change from 1 or 2 months to 1 minute. That's it. That's the kind of things that I would like to do in this office, the way we relate with citizens.
I love it. And we have more or less 10 minutes left, and so I would like to have the last round eh, to speak about the modernization process of Cartagena. So we're undergoing an administrative revolution in the city, which is a very complex thing to do. I mean, we are recreating the whole government because, to give you an example, Cartagena doesn't have an economic development secretary. So we cannot manage, for example, reactivation after post-COVID. We don't have an agency that can actually do that. It doesn't have a competence, right? So that's how old-fashioned and how slow that we get. Like we feel that we have a Ferrari city, and we scarcely have a boogie without gas in terms of the administrative part. So we started last year redesigning, going from a functional model to a process model, which in itself is a big change. And we're starting the conversation with citizens over the internet through these videos that we're creating with you guys, so that people start thinking, what is the city that we want to manage? What do we have to create to manage the city for the next, I don't know, 20 years? So this in itself is an innovation process, and it has all the fears and obstacles and difficulties and everything imaginable that you can tell what comes in. And so I would like to ask you guys to give us a little bit of advice. Like, what would be your key advice to go through the process? Because we have some like, there's a political agenda that we have to confront. There's a civic agenda that we have to go through. The city has around 3,500 employees, and they're afraid to lose their jobs, which won't happen because we won't change. We won't take away employees' places. We're just going to reorganize what we have. But obviously, this is a very, very challenging moment for the city. So I would really love to have your insights on this process. And the same question goes to Juan David. Like, what do you think we have to keep in mind now that you know how the government works inside, and from your role in the planning secretary office, what are the key things that we have to take into account to have success in this modernization effort? So please, Ayesha, I think you can begin.
This is a very, very large question. I feel less equipped. But one thing I will say is in these processes, one thing that we have started making more of a priority within our office is the user research aspect of it. And I wonder if this can work in the processes that you're going through. So in the process of changing everything that you're doing, I think it's really important to make sure that you know your audience that you're working with and work with them in the same way that you have with them and community engagement, to make sure that the people within the city feel some kind of ownership in the changing process. And I know that that might be incredibly difficult when you're restructuring kind of the entire way that the city works, but there is the risk of creating systems and processes that people do not understand and do not like and therefore do not use. So I think like using the agile methodology of, developing and testing and iterating to make sure that people are on board and happy with and able to use the products or systems and processes that you're putting in place, I think would be the piece of advice that I would offer to ensure buy-in. And also, I guess that ownership side of things is really important, whether it's the community that you're working with or whether it's your employees. You need to make sure that everybody feels that kind of ownership so that they embrace the changes that are coming. And I imagine that you'll find that they resist it a little bit less that way.
Great, thank you. That sounds very relevant. Oscar, please.
I would say big changes, right? Like creating entire new agencies, new opportunity, new roles, new goals. It's an opportunity for growth for many public servants, right? So I think framing this not as a reshuffle of organization, but as a growth opportunity for the entire city, I think that might be useful for both the political agenda and people in different staff positions. I will say it would be great to be empathetic, to actually ask people, the 300 and something thousand employees, what is it that they actually would like to be doing in their job, right? What is it? What kind of changes would they like to see? That way, if you did that process, and that is like a perfect, easy process for innovation, right? Surveys for public servants is something that is not hard to stand up. So you could ask them, what are the key things that they would like to see in a new administration design? What are the key things that they would like to do in their jobs? And then maybe that gives you the source of legitimacy for you then to come and stand up with the political agenda when you need to about any particular type of entity that now you want to create. I think that that empathy and listening process will be the things I will do in an organizational restructure of that kind of a size.
Great, Oscar. Thank you very much. Juan David, please.
Well, I was thinking that when I arrived here in the city like 6 months ago, everybody told me that you're going to be in charge of the most important institution in the city. The city is one of the most important cities in Colombia. A lot of tourists come to Cartagena every year. We have a historic value, etc. But if you see the institutional structure of my office, that explains everything. The structure of my office is me, the Secretary of Planning. That's it. There's nothing more. So that's a very powerful message. We have the most important institution doesn't have any other, I don't know if this is the word, deputies for every topic. And I have the responsibility of more than, let me say, 10 or between 10 or 15 different topics. Land use issues, economic issues, a lot of things. And I don't have the chance to get one person in each of these different topics. That's something that makes this institution a very old, difficult institution to manage. So I think this modernization process and this concept of innovation is very important for not only this institution, but for the whole city. We need to change the way we think, the way we do things, because I think is the only chance to change our city, and we cannot lose this opportunity. I think that's the final message that I want to give to all the people that is listening to this presentation, is we cannot lose this opportunity. We have to adapt our institutions for these new challenges. The city is completely different. It's not the city that used to be 20 years ago. We have a lot of challenges and we have a lot of opportunities. This city has a big potential. We have to take advantage of this.
Yes, thank you very much, Juan David. So definitely we're in a huge challenge. I want to thank you very much, Oscar, Ayesha. This was really, really constructive. I think that people from Cartagena are really going to enjoy listening to this webinar and understanding, for example, the question of centralization or just distribution of innovation, understanding innovation as an ecosystem, but also as a process, understanding some of the things like the methodologies that are needed for building participatory conversations in which citizens are involved to create ownership. And my personal favorite is giving tech a purpose, not just thinking about smartification by itself, but just giving tech a reason to be, so that you can give the direction to all of these things. So this conversation was really, really interesting. And I am very grateful for your participation on behalf of the mayor and of the city. We are very, very happy that you joined us, and we're looking forward to keep on asking questions. I'm going to ask Ayesha especially a lot of methodological questions to see how you do this. We would love to have you keep on sharing your secrets, because I think you now understand how much we need your help. So just by email, so that you don't take up so much time, we would love to know what has worked and to see if we can translate it and use it in Cartagena. Again, I am very grateful to all of you. Juan David, thank you very much. I think having the planning secretary in this conversation is key, because it is the core of everything that's going to happen in the future for the city. So I was very glad that you decided to be in this conversation and to participate so actively. Thanks to the three of you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you
so much.
You guys.
Creo que como yo, ustedes debieron quedar muy entusiasmados con la interesante conversación que tuvimos hoy sobre la innovación y sobre cómo se gestiona la innovación desde el sector público. Tenemos mucho que aprender de una ciudad como Nueva York. Los esperamos en el siguiente webinar internacional que contribuye a la reflexión que tenemos sobre cómo se gobiernan las ciudades en el mundo. Y recuerden, el distrito se moderniza.